Oh,
Sitting outside.
good for you.
You're listening to WKDW Radio 97.5 FM and KDWRadio.com, broadcasting from the Bishop West Real Estate Mobile Tower right here in sunny Northport, Florida, I believe, but I'm in Ohio and it's cloudy. Doing the show up here, and I've got a very, very special guest in the house. Lisa, why don't you introduce yourself and give a little background?
Sure. So my name's Lisa Rowe. I am in Northport, Florida right now in my home. And funny story, John, I was born in Ohio. Maybe you already knew that.
Nice. Yes, I
Yeah.
did.
John and I go way back, mostly through my husband, and I'm just really honored to be here today. I've served in a lot of different roles in Northport, and I believe we're here to talk about the role that I'm serving in now as the CEO of Support After Abortion. And personally, I'm a mother of five, blended family, and really grateful to be helping people that are impacted by trauma.
And so, explain what support after abortion actually is.
That's a great question. So we were birthed out of a pregnancy center here in Northport, Florida, Pregnancy Solutions. And it was birthed out of this idea that we knew that there were 1 million abortions happening every year. And so right here in the United States, and yet very few people afterwards were reaching out for support. And we knew there were people hurting because we had heard their stories. And we were wondering why, like what's going wrong, or what could be the product marketing issue. And so we went on this investigation, John, to better understand, is there a need for healing? Do people just not know where to go? Is there a problem with what is being offered? And sure enough, what we found through both consumer research and anecdotal understanding is that there was a product and marketing problem, mostly because the folks that were looking for help after abortion didn't know where to go. 90% of them didn't know where to go. And most of the programs, 95% of them, were very similar, very religious and faith-focused healing, where you had to go in person. And many of the people we surveyed said, I want a non-faith forward, anonymous approach initially, confidential.
Sure.
And so we have been out at Support After Abortion trying to help the movement better understand how to serve men and women after abortion.
Is there and I'm going to ask this because I've never been through the process, and I have known a few people who have had abortions, but that was years ago from my standpoint.
Mm-hmm.
Are there a lot of is there a lot of need for support post-abortion?
Absolutely.
And can you kind of explain what that is for even for someone like me who isn't really sure? I kind of get it, but you're the pro. And can you give your insight on that?
Yeah. And I could go a lot of different directions. So I hope that this conversation can be unpacked because there's a lot to share about that. But I'll start with the research. The same consumer research study we conducted shared that 22 million people in our nation would reach out for help if they knew where to find it. So that's a lot of people that we know and love. The other statistic that I feel like is really important to share is that 1 out of 4 people that we know have experienced abortion. So that means if we're sitting at a dining room table having dinner and we have childbearing aged people or older, 1 out of 4 of them can be assumed that they've experienced abortion. Now, here's where it gets interesting, John. Because we have been programmed as a culture to see abortion as a political issue or a religious issue, people ask that very question, John. Well, my government said it was okay, so I should do it, and it's okay for me. And the reality is it might be okay for you, but then there's other people that feel very differently afterwards. But because of that polarized, stigmatized conversation, they don't know, and they feel incredibly shameful and guilty to reach out for help. We've had people tell us, listen, the clinic said it was going to be nothing, but it wasn't nothing to me. And then when I got outside the clinic, there was a bunch of people holding murder signs. So I didn't feel like I could go to those folks. So I just kind of found myself in a space where I didn't know that anybody else knew how to help me. Right. And so that's why that question is so common, John.
So people who have gone through this handle it differently, right?
Absolutely.
And that's where you come in, and you're able to assist more on the psychological side. Is that correct?
Absolutely. The emotional side. We want to be a soft place to land that doesn't have anything to do with politics or religion. We want to be separate from all of that. And we just want to say, listen, if this is one of those things that has hurt you in your life and you need to talk about it, we're here. We've talked about this in terms of like how people have domestic violence support groups. They have grief groups. They have divorce groups. They have how to get back on your feet after, you landed in a financial situation, smoking cessation. Like we have all of these support groups, but because abortion has been pushed in these, two camps, it's been really difficult for people to see abortion as a human issue that needs healing.
And what are some of the things that you do to heal people? Is it just open dialogue? Is it more counseling, more understanding of what took place?
Yeah. So what we like to help people understand is that because abortion is so polarizing and it has such a stigma connected to it, we have to first look at ourselves, John. And so we're helping the world understand that if we don't change our narrative, if we're constantly talking politics, if we're the people that are calling people that have experienced abortion murderers or whatever narrative we have around abortion, we are not going to be a safe place for people who've experienced abortion. They're going to see that on our social media feed. They're going to hear it in our dinner conversations, and they're going to automatically say, that's one of those people. I don't want to talk about it. So we encourage people to feel challenged in this way. Look at how you're presenting. How are you talking about this topic? Are your friends going to come forward? And when they do come forward because you change your conversation, are you able to show up without judgment? And can you just be there with that person? And so we often recommend that when people share their abortion experiences, that you say, I'm so sorry for your loss. And that doesn't mean we're saying, I'm sorry for the loss of your child. We're not validating any of that. We're saying we're sorry for the loss that you experienced in general. And oftentimes that validates the person on the other side of the conversation so much so that they want to talk about that experience because likely they've never talked to anybody else. So we're helping equip the world to better do that, John. And then once people can start doing that, and this can become our dining room conversation, it can become conversations like you and I are having, where we're not debating whether we voted here or voted there. It's really just, hey, I care about people. You care about people. Let's have this conversation. And then we're helping to provide a wide open array of services, not ones that just fall in the religious camp, not ones that fall in this camp or that camp. We're helping to bring about new understanding that you can start with somebody's sexual abuse, you can start with somebody's relationship issues, and you can start with their abortion experiences. And it doesn't have to be faith forward. It doesn't have to be in a group. It can meet in a Panera. And so we encourage a variety of ways to connect with people.
So with all the changes that have happened in the last maybe 10 days, and currently things are heated in the political realm, do you think that politics needs to be kind of taken and dampened down a little bit on this topic so that more people can have maybe open dialogue about it?
Well, I don't know. That's a great question, John, because I'm really grateful that for the first time in a long time, our world is having this conversation. It doesn't feel good that it's in these kind of ways and places, but so often, what are we told by our parents? Stay away from politics, stay away from religion. And now that it's being elevated in the political world, we're seeing it on the front page of our newspapers. We're seeing it's coming to light as something that might be worthy of discussion, which then can validate men and women who've experienced abortion. It's unfortunate that some of the conversations doesn't validate their experiences, but it's bringing to light maybe some things for people that have been shoved down for years and giving people opportunity to relook at their scenarios, relook at their life experiences and say, you know what, this is a trigger for me and maybe I need some help as a result. But also it's challenging because there's some people in our world that have trusted their government with their morality. And now with the government changing their stance, we heard the president talk earlier today. I mean, it's all over the place. And I do know that most people aren't as equipped or educated to talk about this as maybe we are today, that they're confused. They don't understand what's going down there. They're not able to translate all of this stuff. And so some people might say, well, the government's saying abortion is wrong now. What do I do? But one person says it's right. And so there's lots of conversation that could be confusing to people right now.
Isn't it a personal choice of whether you
Hmm.
believe it's right or it's wrong?
Yeah, every human has their own experiences, right? I mean, every story is different. Everybody has their own reasons for the choices that they've made, and we all have our own journeys after we make those choices.
One of the things I know that you brought into the mix was the sexual assault side of things, and I have once a month I have care on to talk about
Hmm.
just that, along with human trafficking. And what we found is having open dialogue once a month on this topic has really opened up people's hearts and minds, I think, in a different if in a different manner than what they were used to, because uh, along those same topics, it's kind of hush hush. Oh, I don't want to talk about it. If I do know somebody, I don't want anybody to know. But the
Hmm.
resources that are out there and the help that's out there and the people who commit their lives to care and other organizations like that,
Hmm.
they're very genuine. Um, in the same world that we're in,
Hmm.
isn't that what you're about too?
Absolutely. I mean, what you're doing with those conversations you have once a month is having the conversation that everybody avoids. I mean, we see that homeless person on the corner, and we all have a stereotype about them. Oh, they choose that life, or they're a drug addict, or I need to help them, or I only help them if I can go to the local fast food restaurant. Whatever our story is, we all have stereotypes, and what you're doing is helping to maybe provide a different narrative, maybe provide some more enlightenment. One of the things that comes to mind, John, as I think about what you were saying, is that when I walked into the anti-sex trafficking organization I worked in, after the high school, I thought there was a difference between prostitution and trafficking. And I learned very quickly that it was because the world wanted it to look like that. No woman wakes up and says, I can't wait to sell my body today. There's often very real trauma underneath that. And so we've even watched legislation change around the language around prostitution and trafficking and violation and exploitation and all sorts of things, because people are starting to understand that you don't just get up and go walk 41 because you want to. There's something real underneath it. And if we're not trauma informed, we are very much neglecting the human experience. So, what you're doing is allowing people to understand that there's a really broken person under some of these experiences.
Well, and I want to take a walk down two different paths for just a
Mhm.
second, because the listening audience is a mix. Um, we're often on the male side, we're often told it's none of our business,
Mhm.
and we don't have an opinion. I want to go down the path of the female though,
Okay.
because I want to understand that side more clear
Mhm.
than maybe I do today. And I'm hoping the listeners want to do the same. I want you to take me down the path of somebody who is making the decision to have an abortion and what they go through and what they contemplate.
It's a great question. And thanks for wanting to know the whole story. Um, Most of the women that I work with who've experienced abortion have struggled with some sort of early childhood dysfunction, whether that's early experience with the parent's death, divorce, childhood sexual abuse, which is very, very common, something that violates their identity, their value, their purpose, their self worth. And they find themselves throughout life looking to other people, John, to get validation, to validate, their self-esteem, their worth. And they find themselves in relationships willing to do almost anything to get their love for self met, because they don't know how to do it and they've never had a model of that. Some people turn to substance abuse, some people turn to violent relationships. I mean, we see the gamut, right? And when you are operating in those vulnerable, very risky behaviors, oftentimes an unexpected pregnancy is a very real likelihood for people. And with this instant culture, with this not knowing what to do right away, oftentimes we have women who go, I really thought that I could handle pregnancy, but I can't with this situation. I know most of the time people tell us 75% of the time, I know it's a baby. I mean, that's not most of the dispute anymore. It's more about I don't know how I'm going to get through whatever this is. And because of all their trauma and lack of skills, they just go right to solving what they see as the problem right there. And so they find themselves experiencing abortion. And what we hear a lot of times is that when then women become even more promiscuous afterwards, some people then intentionally get pregnant afterwards, trying to solve the wound that they experienced through that abortion. And then the pattern repeats as we move, further into growing those wounds from childhood and not solving and healing from the things that we're experiencing as an adult, until that one thing gets us on our knees. And then we find, an opportunity to recover from a lot of these painful places.
So you said something there that I kind of want to hit on, is that the female gets pregnant again to kind of soothe the wound.
Sometimes, yeah.
And
Sometimes that's a very real thing.
So when that happens, is it more of and I'm not even sure how to ask the question, but is there more intensity focused on that second pregnancy because they lost the first?
A lot of times, that's a great question. We hear moms that share that they are helicopter moms afterwards, that this is in the psychological world, we call this replacement child. And so there's this constant need of trying to fill the void. And so all the fears and worries that come in, it happens often after miscarriage as well, John. And so it's a human behavior that I lost something, now I want to do it better this time. And so you see these like hypersensitive, like just focused parents that really struggle.
Well, and I'm kind of glad that you put the miscarriage in there, because people who have miscarriages, they're not labeled, are they?
They are not.
And so miscarriage is one thing, but abortion is another. I happen to have a more liberal stance on the abortion side of it. And I'm not against it, but I like to have some restraint. So I want to go down the path of the male for a second, because I think that has to be an open invitation for dialogue from anyone that's involved in this, and they have to be ready for both sides. And so I want you to take me down the path of, first, a male who has input and a male who doesn't have input for the abortion process.
Yeah. And they're very real, both of them. And then I would add the third one, which is ambivalent, right? So people that have a choice, they don't have a choice. And then they're kind of wishy-washy, like the culture says it's her body, I don't really even feel like I can say anything. So I would say that men who are in these situations very much follow what we shared about women. They struggle with early childhood experiences that leave them defenseless to some of these more vulnerable adult behaviors. They are also looking for love in relationships, but they're also biologically created in a way that they enjoy, all sorts of, risky sexual behavior. And many of them don't have fathers. Many of them don't understand the risk factors, and they choose to engage in these relationships. And sometimes they're married and they have living children. And the financial strain of having one more child is just really difficult. And so I'll start with one person that I know very well who was in college when their abortion experience took place. And their coach actually said, you have an opportunity to make it to the MLB. What are you going to do? And he said, and the coach said, I will pay for you to go have an abortion. And the girlfriend basically put her hands up and said, if this is the way that you're going to get to the MLB, I'm all for it. And so they actually went because he encouraged it because of his career path. I've heard that several times. Another gentleman who entered into the NFL, he said, I put those 3 letters before the letters of my child's name, NFL, instead of his child's initials. And so there's the gentleman who's driven by career path, who makes this decision. A woman falls victim to that, his needs first and that sort of thing. Then you have a woman who says, you know what, I don't trust you. You've been cheating on me. I'm having this abortion. And he says, I don't want that. I'm ready to change. I want to be with you. And she says, no way. We're getting an abortion. You haven't shown worthy of my trust. And so they go and and he feels voiceless. He feels like, gosh, I never wanted this. I didn't realize that there were consequences. I didn't realize that this was what she would want. And then, as I mentioned before we started, is that you have men that say, gosh, I don't have a right to say anything about this. This is her body. Her parents are forcing her to go have this abortion. I don't know that I believe in it or not, but I don't feel like I can say anything. And so I'm just going to wash my hands and say, if this is what they want for you and you're okay with it, I'll take you.
And with that being said, with those 3-4 different scenarios, maybe 5 different scenarios. I mean,
there's millions.
There's millions. I was going to say, I don't know that we can count all the different scenarios that are out there. You're offering the support for all of them, aren't you?
All of them. That's right, John. I mean, wherever somebody lies on the spectrum. And I want to share that, John, since your listening audience is men. I mean, that is such an underserved population in this world because of the narrative that it's her body. And I just want to validate that if you're a man listening right now and you have experienced abortions and you need support, we're here for you. It's not an only woman's issue. This is a family issue. John, when I was in my early 20s, my sister called me in a crisis, and I contributed to her abortion experience by saying, what are you going to do? How can you handle this? Later on, as I've grown in my understanding, I realized that I could have been more neutral in my response to her, and I wouldn't have encouraged something that I really didn't understand the ramifications for. And so I feel like we need to understand that abortion has ripple effects, and it's not just a singular issue for one person.
So I want to go back to you for a second, because that scenario that's playing out that's common in even today's world, where the pressure is being put on by an individual, maybe not understanding the full ramification.
That's right.
And so the open dialogue that we're having today, and really that we're kind of blessed because the government is up in arms with each other at this point.
Yeah.
It's one of those situations where can't there be some gains on both sides with education?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And especially, I'd like to take a minute to talk about medication abortion versus surgical abortion. John, 20 years ago, before the FDA approved what we call the abortion pill, if a woman wanted to have an abortion, she would need to go to a clinic. And through that experience, she would be anesthetized, and then surgically she would have the removal of her child or her fetus, whatever anybody wants to call it. And so, that was a very real way to experience abortion prior to 2000. Now, and it's increasingly becoming more popular. We heard President Biden talk about it this morning. More people are having what we call at-home abortions. And so there's a real risk to that in terms of being all alone. And so I'm thinking about a woman that I walked alongside of. Her 2 children were in an apartment. She was living with an aunt at the time. And she took the first pill, and then she took the second pill, which induces labor. And she went into full labor in her bathroom where she gets ready for work in the morning. She had delivered her child in her toilet. This is her wording. And then removed her child. This again is her wording, and held her child in her hands for 2 hours because she couldn't stand to flush her, this is her words again, baby down the toilet. Now, some people will say it's just a clump of cells. And for some people, that is their story and they can do that. But there's other people that are having these experiences all by themselves with nobody knowing, children, family members, whomever outside of the bathroom. They press flush like they're told, or they turn on the shower. Some people put their children in shoe boxes and put them in their closet because they don't realize what they signed up for, and they can't deal with it right there in that moment. But what we're trying to help people understand is that the next day that woman comes back into her bathroom to brush her teeth and go to work. I mean, that is a trauma site now, right? I mean, she just went through an ER experience and now she's living in that ER experience with, all of the memories and all of the experiences. And it's very painful. And to be all alone to do something like this is very, very scary for me as a clinician. And so I hope that people can understand that that's where we're moving into as a world. And so we really have to be cognizant of those people that we're connected with, employment, employers, and all sorts of things, that this is becoming a very private issue, even more than it was.
So I want to stay on the topic right there for a second, because I don't think people really fully grasp when you use the word trauma. Because I worked trauma. I was in level 1 trauma at Grant Medical Center, downtown Columbus. I saw trauma at multiple levels. One of the first ladies I actually took care of was in a car wreck, brain dead.
Yeah.
Her baby survived because we kept her alive, and we kept great care of her all the way through the process until she delivered. Which I still kind of get goosebumps over that. But when you start looking at the trauma effect of just a regular car accident, regular trauma that one would go through, I don't know that as a society we're actually looking at that maybe with open heart and open mind when it comes to the real, I think, tragic, and tragic is probably a bad word, but it's just a scenario that I don't think most people are comprehending when they talk about abortion or post-abortion, what somebody has to go through. And really, you're highlighting it for me, which just puts me in a completely different perspective. Because of how you actually said that and how that story played out. A lot of people would take the side of, well, they shouldn't have been in that situation to begin with. Okay, let's talk real world. Okay, because we live in a real world. All these, I want to say, falsehoods that we all want to believe that we're going to go one way or the other, period. I'm sorry, we're going to be in the middle ground somewhere along the way. And I just want your interpretation of where people should try to land on making open dialogue and maybe trying to stir up more conversation. Should they be middle of the road, or should they take their extremes?
Yeah, it's a wonderful question. I want to go back to my sister, John. I mean, had I understood the comprehensiveness of abortion when I was talking to her and my own junk and what I was contributing to the conversation, it would have looked a lot different. It wouldn't have looked like I had the answer or that I was judging her. It would have looked like, my gosh, you're in a really difficult situation. What do you need from me right now? How can I help you? Rather than saying, how the hell are you going to do this? What do you know about being a parent? You've struggled so bad. And so I would use that example to springboard into your question to say, listen, this isn't as much of a political and religious issue as we think. This is a human issue. And just like we would see a woman on the side of the road, running away from her perpetrator, like we were talking about with care, or if we had a family member who was dying of a drug overdose, there's compassion there for people. You talked about somebody who has an illness, we have such compassion for people in other places and spaces. I would encourage everyone listening and anyone who's had judgment around abortion, you can still vote however you want to vote, but know that there's people behind these experiences and they need our support. They need our love, and they can heal despite whether you're pro-choice, pro-life, if you're a radical this side or radical that side, or your religion says one thing. Everybody deserves a chance to heal. Everybody deserves to be free of their pain. We all have experienced some sort of tragedy that we've induced ourselves. And so why does abortion fall outside of all of these other experiences that life throws at us? Because we've been
Programmed.
Yeah, we have.
Yeah, and it's a hard Um, it's a hard uphill battle on
Mhm.
both sides. And I'm
Mhm.
not going to give one side favorability over the other. I think that there has to be some middle ground in there somewhere, just in a real life scenario. Um, we talk a little bit about abuse. Um, there has to be middle of the road there, and the word compassion, it's across the board when it comes to these um, really hot topics that are out there. You've got alcoholism, you've got drugs, you've got human trafficking.
Mhm.
If we took the same approach on all of these other situations as we do on abortion, which people build walls, they do all kinds of things to protect themselves from an open dialogue.
That's right.
Um, and I don't know that anybody learns any more or any less if they don't go into it with an open mind.
Yeah,
Uh,
that's good.
and so with your history, your experience, and you've got one a life history with your sister, and now you're going into the counseling side of things, and you're trying to help people. Where do you find most people that you talk to when they're against abortion, and coming in and maybe being brought in by a loved one to say, hey, I want you to come to counseling with me so you understand?
Mm. Oh, that's a good one. I don't know that I've ever experienced someone that's totally against abortion who has come to counseling sessions, but I would say that I've experienced a lot of people who hold murder signs, are very much against abortion. And oftentimes, John, and this was when I was at Pregnancy Solutions and prior, oftentimes the conversation about healing is like a bridge. If somebody's really like, you should have free, choice, reproductive justice, this sort of thing, versus no, this is not something that everybody, babies have voices. And usually people can come into the middle and say, I can see that, abortion could hurt somebody. And I could see that it could be there could be a really real reason why somebody would have needed to experience abortion. I think everybody deserves help. And so I don't usually have to experience those sort of big debates, John, because I get to be the person that says, hey, there's a human being back here that's hurting and needs somebody to talk to about it. And oftentimes those people will move off of that mountain into a place to say, well, yeah, everybody deserves some sort of love. It's the people that stand behind these signs and never seek to understand that I often see as those wall builders that you talk to, that won't have a conversation with me, that are standing on principle alone, have never looked at their own internal junk, that can't see like their own pains and how they're hurting the world because they haven't taken an interior look at themselves. And so they're not open to anything. They likely stand on a mountain about almost every topic because this is just who they have chosen to be. But most of the time, the people that can come out from behind those signs or sit down at a table with me, we really can find a middle ground.
So do you think that the extreme, and I'm gonna put this in the wording, is that the extreme side of things with different people uh, for on different stances, the on the extreme side of things, do you think that there's more of those, or there are more in the middle, neutral,
Yeah.
and just the others get exploited?
Absolutely. Isn't that what we see? And when I was a teacher, John, and I use this story a lot, what student got the most attention? The one that was screaming, the one that was causing so much distraction, the one that was all over the place, because we needed them to stop so we could teach, right? And although you get all this training on how not to let that one kid get your attention, he does, and he gets all the extra meetings, or she gets all the extra meetings and all the time of the administration. That's exactly what you're pointing out right now. If we look at the bell curve, the majority of people fall somewhere in the middle. They fall somewhere in the unknown. They fall somewhere in open conversation, that willing to have dialogue. It's these very extremist kind of things, like the student I'm describing, that get that attention, that get the storylines, that get the media's, focus.
Is there other than this, is there another way that you have been reaching out to try to open the dialogue with other organizations?
Yeah, I mean, I go into churches all the time. We're doing abortion healing provider meetings. So there are thousands of providers across the world that have felt isolated in this experience, and we're helping to train them through best practices. We have a clinical group that meets monthly with other clinicians like me talking about this topic. As a clinician, we are responsible to meet people with neutrality, not bias. And for so long, people in my profession have been concerned to even prepare themselves to have this conversation with clients, and we're in fear they're going to lose their license. But they're again programmed to think that if somebody brings up abortion in your office, or we were to bring up abortion in an intake, that somehow that describes our political views, and that's not at all the case. We're navigating the client experience, and so helping that clinician feel like this is a topic we can discuss. For years, John, I never talked about it in my sessions because I didn't know it was a thing. I didn't know it was an issue until I started hearing people's stories and going, I never brought this up during assessment. So trying from all the different angles to connect with people, pro-life groups, pro-choice groups, all different groups to connect on, hey, when you're talking about this issue, just know that there's a man and woman behind this experience, a family behind this experience who could potentially use support. And if you're only talking about this in one way, you're missing it.
Well, and I'm going to ask something now that I'm in my mind, I'm trying to work some of these angles that maybe people go through. Is there a percentage that actually commits suicide post abortion?
We hear, I don't know the actual number of suicide, the amount of suicide that's attributed to abortion experiences, but suicide is one of the after effects that when we learned about when we did our consumer research. Regret, depression, anxiety, suicidal ideation, relationship issues. I mean, there's a gamut of things that increased as a result of abortion experiences.
Well, can you give your contact information and your website, and so that people can go check everything out?
Yeah, the best place for people to find us is supportafterabortion.com. We're on Instagram, we're on Facebook, we are on TikTok. We are trying to reach everyone and anyone. If you're international or somebody international, they can connect through WhatsApp, and you can connect with anonymity, confidential. Somebody will be ready to take your text or your phone call should you want to speak about your experience. Should something we said today have triggered you, maybe something in the news or the media, the presidential conversation this morning, the Supreme Court decision a few days ago, we are here to help you navigate that free of charge, no cost. And again, it's confidential. You don't have to give us your name, your contact information. We are just here to support you.
And so you've been through different organizations. Can you kind of give your highlights and what you've done in the past? Because I think that lays the groundwork for where you're at today.
It really does, John. So by trade, I'm a licensed clinical social worker, but I always say that my experience and training came through my own dysfunction through childhood. My parents struggled through a really bad divorce. I have a dad who's an alcoholic, a mom who's codependent, and I didn't realize that those things even affected me until I got into my 20s, when I started seeing some of the adult manifestations of those experiences. I ended up in my own divorce and unexpectedly pregnant, newly married, and all sorts of baggage left and right. And simultaneously, my career has always served people who struggled with early trauma and their own vulnerabilities. So I was the teen parent program director at Northport High School. I worked in an anti-trafficking organization, Selah Freedom, headquartered in Sarasota. I then worked at our pregnancy center, headquartered in Venice, and now at Support After Abortion. And I got to tell you, when I entered into the role back here in Northport out of sex trafficking, John, I think you and I even had a conversation. I was like, what do I know about all of this? And the reality, what I learned, John, was that we are more alike than we are different, and symptoms can look different, but the root of it is all very similar. And so I even wrote a book, Unraveled Roots, because I learned that many of us have experienced abandonment, addiction issues, some sort of codependency in our life. And those things, take root in us, and these symptoms start to. So even though my symptom is not abortion, the divorce experience I had, the codependency, the relationship issues, single parenting, very much connects with a woman who's experienced abortion in its own way. And that goes for somebody who's experienced sexual abuse and addiction issues. We're all so much more alike. We're trying to numb something that's broken inside of us, and we're doing it through this dysfunctional behavior because we don't know any better.
I will stay right there for a second, because what you just said was that we're trying to numb something. That's just not one-sided either. That's just not a female thing.
No,
because men do it too.
they do.
We just may handle ourselves a little different because we're not allowed to show emotion or have emotion over certain topics because we're not allowed to do that. And that's just the way we were brought up. And I want you to talk a little bit about that, because that has to be something that you confront within the therapy side of things.
Yeah, because again, we're programmed. Men do this and show up tough, and women show up and we're the emotional, crazy woman. And I mean, these are the things that we're constantly, contending with in society. Or maybe we're the woman who never had a man, and here we are, like, tough girl, and we have to do everything. And then that guy who's never had a father figure, who's maybe he doesn't know how to be masculine, and he doesn't know how to be the protector or the leader of his family. I mean, there's so many things contending in our lives that we would never even understand until we stop and take a look at ourselves. And so you're right, John. I mean, men need permission to be not okay and to not, shove it away. I mean, men usually manifest all this broken pain in anger, in addiction, right? In tons of relational issues. We see it all over the place. Work, workaholism, pride, ego. And so they need a place to expel all of that so that they're not driven by some of their own pain.
Well, and I'm glad we talked about that, because there's just so many differences with the couple or individuals who are going through this. And I'm glad that you kind of addressed the situation where it was couples or individuals, because whether it's a guy who's not involved and wants to be, or a female who's made the decision and said, no, we're not going to do it. I think the public needs to kind of wake up and say, this happens every single day.
Yeah.
How many babies again per year?
1 million.
Okay.
In the United States.
1 million per year. And I want to kind of go back when I was a kid. I believe and I'm going to ask this question because I'm sure it's still out there somewhere in the world, but the old coat hanger, oh my gosh, we're going to go back to coat hanger days. Modern technology right now, you described the pill. Is that something that's being utilized at a higher clip now than ever before?
Yeah, in 2022, 7 out of 10 pregnancies will be aborted 7 out of 10 of abortions will be a medication abortion.
And are we still doing the coat hanger thing in the dark alleys?
No. And I think people need to understand that even though the Supreme Court turned abortions back to the state, it doesn't mean abortion's going to end. There are states where it's not going to be legal, but there are going to be states where abortion will be legal all the way up until the end of pregnancy. In fact, we hear it all the time with in the news these days, is how many different states are saying, I'm not standing for this. We're going to be a destination state for abortion. So it doesn't mean it's going to end just because of what we're hearing in the news.
Well, and you're kind of in an industry, and I'm going to say this because I was in the medical field and now I'm in real estate. I kind of have two fields that seem to never end. You're either going to always be a realtor, or you're going to retire, or you're always going to be in medical sales or medical somewhere. Just like with what you're doing with the abortion support side of things, I don't know that that's ever going to go away, no matter how we look at this.
Yeah. Well, and with 50 years of legalized abortion, John, and that means 4 to 5 generations living among us of abortion experiences, and only maybe now people feeling validated to come forward to say, maybe I need some support around this. I mean, we're just scratching the surface with the amount of people we're serving now. I feel like the lid is about to come off, and people will be looking to talk about the need for healing.
Do you? I have to ask this because of care, and the fact that I did those interviews too. We talk about things that are along the side of rape and prevention, and we talk about the post care. There was a time where rape was completely stamped down in dialogue, because you were not allowed to have open conversation about that whatsoever, because you were afraid to hurt someone, okay, or shame. Are we at that same point now with abortion?
Yeah, I think that this new conversation that we're having it's illuminating, where this was one of those don't talk about it conversations. We only talk about it if we're on a rally or something like that. Yeah. Or we're voting, for the president. But yes, I believe it's become more and more as we're seeing it on our public news stations. We're seeing debates all over our social media. You and I are talking about it now, and only because it's being highlighted inside of our government right now.
And I actually think it's a good thing anytime that you can, I think, take the dialogue away from the government and put it in the hands of people who are willing to have open dialogue, and learn and maybe listen on occasion, and maybe swallow some pride, on one side or the other, because I don't think we grow as a society if we're just on I'm going to go back to the extremist, and I'll use the extreme on the abortion side because I'm not there. But those people, just like the extreme on the other side, have shut down all dialogue. And the more they shut down dialogue, the more the lines are drawn in the sand.
Yeah.
And it's the middle of the country, the middle thinkers, who are in need of open dialogue.
Yeah. Listen, trauma, John, fogs every bit of our ability to think clearly. I think a lot of times, like, when you hear that fire alarm in your house go off, it's so loud. My dogs start barking. The kids are running around. Everybody wants to know where it is. I'm looking to see, like, is this just a battery default, or is there something really going on? I mean, I'm not thinking about what's going on in my bathroom or I just immediately go to what's safe. What do we need to do? And my brain just starts working, that fight, flight, or freeze that we do. We're trained. That's how we're created biologically. And I want people to understand, if they take nothing else away today, that people don't stop when they're getting ready to have an abortion to say, what is my political views? What does my aunt think politically? What did my pastor say last night? Like, they are not thinking like that. No different than when that fire alarm goes off in my house. I think safety, get out. That's what people are thinking when they're in the midst of their trauma. What do I need to do right this moment to save myself, to save my circumstance, because I'm not going to have a place to live. I can't afford it, whatever their circumstances. And so if we can, as a body of people, understand that in moments of trauma and crisis, we make decisions that we can potentially regret down the road, and they have nothing to do with our faith or our politics. Those go out the window immediately. We look at this conversation in a very, very different way. And the other way isn't going to solve the problem. It's just going to continue to make it, around the mountain.
So with the therapy that you provide, and the insight that you have, what are some of the things that you would tell people right now to maybe ask questions, or even think of things a little differently? What would you actually tell them?
Yeah, I would say, how are you stirred by this conversation between John and I? I mean, if it's bringing up like, what she's saying is such crap, or what John says, or I feel this way, or I want you to have that conversation out loud with somebody. Are you willing to abandon that part of you for just a moment, like John's been encouraging us to say, is there a different way to look at this? Do I know people? Do I care about people that because of the way I'm showing up, I'm not a soft place for them to enter into a conversation? And maybe you're the only person that they would have a conversation. So examine your own stereotypes. Where do you land on this issue? And is there a way for you to separate how you vote politically and how you see people who've experienced abortion? And is there a way to integrate the two? Because that's the most important thing, is that if you can start being more sensitive, not saying I agree with abortion or I disagree with abortion, but I agree that people are people and they need help. There's a very different way that you show up, and you become a place of safety for people to enter into conversations. And they're so confused right now about all this government hoopla that they're really struggling to know what to say and how to say it.
And that's great advice. I just think that people need to remember, like you said, there are people on the other side who have made these decisions, and we're not throwing them out with the bathwater. So if we want to make them part of an accepting society, I think we all need to maybe settle in a little bit, open up our hearts again, open up the minds. You don't have to agree across the board with someone, but you also have to, if you're on the other side, you have to remember you have to have an open mind too.
That's right.
Because you can't get anywhere as long as you build the wall and you don't have open dialogue. The time frame, I think, where we're at today, and you can tell me differently. I think because of what's going on in the world, in our country, people are more prone to listen. Most of the people are more apt to listen today versus any time in the history of our country.
Yeah.
And I think they're craving dialogue. And I think what they're craving is what you provided today, which is honest dialogue. With really, you're not leaning one way or the other in this conversation, because whether you admit it or not, and whether I admit it or not, abortions are going to go on, and they're not going to change. But what you're talking about is 50 years of past history that has never had the opportunity to have support.
Yeah. And John, this kind of really mirrors the nicotine conversation. 50 years ago, cigarettes glamorized, supermodels on billboards, these kinds of things. And now, cigarettes are still very legal. They put restrictions on where you can smoke and that sort of thing. But now every other commercial that I see, John, is somebody speaking about their, esophagus being, we just have more education now than we ever did. And never again would we ever see a supermodel with a cigarette hanging out of her mouth or in her hand, right? Never. It's not glamorized in the way, right, that it used to be. And so I think as a society, we become more educated. And I think we're really being able to see the mirroring of that as we go, is that abortion isn't all like this glamorous kind of thing that maybe it once was projected to be. And it really has a lot of consequences. And so let's see the whole person, the whole picture. Let's slow down for a moment, let everything fog, and make the best decision for you, not a irrational one right away.
And I definitely want to have you back on, because I think the topic needs to have more dialogue. And I know that we didn't even touch on half of the things you want to really get out there and talk about. And I want to really talk about more statistics the next time you're on. But, I think we may have opened some hearts and minds today, but I would like you to give your contact information. We only have about a minute and a half left.
Sure. So you're getting it on your scroll on the screen on the bottom, but supportafterabortion.com is the best place for you to go. You can email help@supportafterabortion.com. If that's not anonymous enough for you, you can text us. Our phone number is on our website and it's coming across the screen once again. But you can text, you can call. And remember, we don't want your phone number. We don't want your information. We want you to feel like this is a confidential place. And that number is 844-289-4673.
All right. Well, Lisa, I really appreciate you coming on. I
Mhm.
always enjoy talking to you anyway, but
Me too.
we're going to set another date, and we're going to push some advertising out on that so that we can get
Great.
more listeners in and hopefully more dialogue.
Absolutely.
All right.
Thank you, John.
Thanks. Have a great weekend. This is John Rawlings with